can't just do in educating the application development community. You've got to almost sell to your customers and convince the business that this is an important thing. Typically, at least in our business, they tend to be even more paranoid in some cases than us technology people, so it's a very easy sell once you've convinced the business that it'll give the developers plenty of time and plenty of focus to make sure they get this right. So, like I say, you have to draw the line in the sand, and then you do all the soft sell after that.
Phil, there has been some studies which actually show that security is just not addition in cost to the project development, but actually reduces cost, because if you look at entire software development project and you consider maintenance piece, maintenance is 60 to 70% of the whole life cycle of a software application. And good security will reduce your maintenance costs, and that itself should be a good business case to get security in, just not focusing on the application development costs, which might be an enhancer for cost.
Yeah, absolutely. What's worked in my experience is similar to what Phil has alluded to, which is I think it's a necessity to include a portion of your development capital and allocate it to security at the commencement of an effort, rather than try to address the issues obviously after the fact, when studies have shown that the resolution can be far more expensive. I think I've seen studies that say 7 times more costly to resolve a problem after deployment. So I think really making sure that you've allocated capital appropriately for security within your projects, and say this is what, it's 10%. We use 10% as a sort of arbitrary number, but to have something earmarked to say this is what we're going to allocate to security. The consequence of not doing that is the situation I would find myself in over and over again, which is where although I worked for the CIO in my former role, so did the relationship managers that worked for the business. The 9th hour, they would come to me and say, hey, we're going to go live tomorrow, and you need to certify the application as ready. I can't do it. I haven't even seen it. And then basically it would be a question of the relationship manager standing with the business going, he's not going to let you go to production. He's the bad guy. He's the one stopping you. Puts me in an awful lot of pressure on the CISO or the security group to not stand in the way of innovation. So I think it's really important that you really set that precedent and set that reserve up right away, because you're going to need it.
My experience with this is that you've got to build it into the process. So, I think if a situation is, as has already been mentioned, it comes up after the fact, you're going to be late. It's going to cost more money, or you're going to be exposed. And unfortunately, because typically you can't afford to be late, it's going to be exposed. In our case, we find that the best thing to do, which we have done, is build it into. We don't make a distinction with application security per se. When we've gotten groups, to buy into the process, it's just part of the development process. And in fact, it doesn't delay, and there's not an identifiable separate cost in making sure that you've identified all your security requirements while you're gathering requirements, that you've done your code scanning, not at some late point after the fact, but you've done it through all of the builds. And in that case, there's no difference. The developers don't feel like they're doing something special. That kind of the word check paradigm, I think, is a good example of that. So I don't think it adds any specific time per se. Yeah, you've got to educate people and build libraries and do all the things that you have to do to get yourself ready to write code well, but that's not that big a deal.
Just to add a couple of things on this topic, my personal views are, I think I'm a strong believer that if you, given the right awareness and the processes and having automated technologies, right? Automated technologies is key, because that's how you decrease the life cycle of the development process, especially when you want to focus on security. It results in better quality of code. Right. So an example is when you look at a stock exchange, wherein if you look at an electronic stock exchange where the time for order flow and execution is measured in microseconds, and anything in its path that brings latency is not looked upon too kindly by the executive team. You need to look at, well, how else can you provide for assurance over your business critical applications without necessarily adding a whole lot of layers beneath or above that. So you look at code, you look at the operating system. How do you provide for better quality of code? That's where it comes in. Do you have the right framework within your development lifecycle to look for, well, security has an impact. If it's a business critical application, I mean, someone would say, yes, I don't want to take those risks, right? So I think you will lead to a better quality of code is what I'm trying to say at the end of the day. Even if you just look at very specific attributes, example, race conditions, right? Depending on the technology that you use, I mean, that's classified as a security attribute that you check for. Not directly attributed, but it impacts as to how this application runs and behaves and results in better performance.
Thanks, Sunil. Right, the next question to the
Hey,
panelists.
we got more to say on that question.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Jeez.
Go ahead.
Trying to
Jim.
cut us off.
I'm sorry.
Jennifer has an important point. Okay, she's gonna. But one thing, if you do decide to draw the line, as Phil suggested, one technique that I recommend that you consider, especially when you're putting your controls in towards the tail end of the life cycle prior to moving code into production, is Kevlar. I'd recommend Kevlar, specifically Kevlar vest. You know, they're not too bad looking these days. You can kind of fit it, you can fit a jacket over like this, and you really don't know, but I definitely recommend the Kevlar, because you will get some bullet holes and survival will be a challenge. So frankly, I had one situation where we developed this application framework, announced it to the street on a specific delivery date, decided, because I was somewhat fortunate in convincing someone to do a penetration test. So we pen tested this big component. All of our applications going to work through that. And we found it, that the test results came back and it said Swiss cheese. That's typically not a good indicator. So when we saw that, we said, oh, we can't go to market with this. And so I was the one elected to, or nominated, and everybody stepped back and said, yeah, Jim, you tell him. So I had to tell our CEO that we weren't going to go live with this as we promised the street. And I learned that that's not a key success factor for lengthening your career. And matter of fact, I think if I did that again, my career would be shortened quite a bit. So I decided that probably wasn't a good approach. So the alternative, if that's somewhat painful for you to think about, the alternative is to use your customers, whatever your customers are, the consumers of the software, use them to sell the benefit in terms of security by asking a simple question. By the way, when we deliver this code to you, do you expect it to be secure? And if the answer is yes, you say, thank you very much. I'm going to take that back to my stakeholders and remind them of that fact. The second thing to do is to take the controls, whatever controls that you want to put into your SDLC, move them to the front of the life cycle as much as you can. And the reason for that, Carnegie Mellon did a study years ago, probably 9-10 years ago, on the value of fixing a defect at different stages of the software life cycle. Some of you are nodding your head, you're aware of this. So just so you know, understand the variability, if you fix the defect in the requirements stage, that's 1. And if you fix it after the code goes into production, that's 36. So it's 36 times the cost to remediate the defect after the code is in production. So you can think of that's the spectrum that you're dealing with. So if your controls are back-end loaded, it's more expensive. So rather than talking about the security all the time like a broken record, even though we're faced with that challenge, you can say, look, we're trying to develop a resiliency program that's more cost-effective. So we're moving the controls early.